You can't just ignore the facts!
And you can't keep twisting the truth!
It's entertainment.
The wine glass slipped from Aria's fingers and shattered across the polished floor, the sharp crack cutting through the laughter and clinking silverware around her. For a moment, every conversation at the Clark family's anniversary dinner paused. Dozens of eyes turned her way. She froze, cheeks burning, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Careful there," Sienna Clark called from across the table, her voice dripping with amusement. "These glasses are probably worth more than your whole month's salary." Laughter rippled through the table. Aria swallowed hard, murmuring, "I'm sorry." She crouched to pick up the shards, her hands trembling. "Just leave it," Helen Clark said sternly, waving over a server. "Accidents happen, or, in this case, they're predictable." Aria straightened, trying to mask the sting that cut deeper than the glass ever could. The humiliation settled heavily in her chest. Evan reached for her hand under the table and squeezed. "It's okay," he whispered. "Ignore them." But how could she? How could anyone ignore a family who seemed to take pleasure in reminding her she didn't belong? She forced a smile at Evan, though her throat felt tight. She wished she could slip away, vanish into the quiet safety of her bookstore back in Harborstone. But she stayed because of him. It hadn't always been like this. When Aria first met Evan, life had felt unexpectedly simple, warm, and real. But now, sitting at the Clark family's towering dining table, surrounded by people who assessed her like a stain on fine linen, she wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Gerald Clark rose from his seat, tapping his glass for attention. "Before we continue, I'd like to make a small toast," he announced. "To my wife. 30 years of marriage, partnership, and building a strong family legacy." The room erupted in polite applause. Aria clapped too, though her mind drifted. She tried to focus on the good. The glimmer in Evan's eyes when he talked about future city projects, the way he held her as though she was soft enough to break and precious enough to protect. But every word from his family chipped at her resolve. As Gerald lifted his glass again, his gaze slid toward her. "And to Evan," he said, "my son, who's always worked hard, always aimed high, and never relied on anyone else to get where he is." A pointed pause followed. Aria's shoulders tensed. "It's a rare thing these days," Gerald continued, "especially with influences around us that might encourage shortcuts." Sienna chuckled. Helen smirked. Several guests exchanged looks as if they'd been waiting for the remark. Evan's jaw tightened. "Dad, enough." Gerald shrugged, pretending innocence. "What?" "I'm just saying some people like to earn success and others prefer to marry into it." The jab was unmistakable. Aria stared at her plate, heat spreading through her cheeks and chest. A knot formed in her stomach. She heard Sienna whisper to her cousin, loud enough to hear, "It's sweet, really. Evan's little charity case." Her cousin whispered back, "She's pretty, though. Must be how she got him." Aria closed her eyes for half a second. She could take insults, sneers, thinly veiled condescension, but hearing them degrade her love, the one sacred thing she had chosen freely, that burned. She felt herself drifting between past and present. The bookstore air warm with the scent of paper and coffee. Evan smiling as he recited lines from a novel he claimed changed his life. Walking along the pier with him while seagulls swept across the sky. Hearing him tell her again and again, "Anna, I love that you're real." Real. If only he knew. Back at the table, Helen leaned forward, her tone deceptively polite. Aria, dear, have you found any upward mobility in your little bookstore job? Any plans for advancement? Aria forced her voice steady. I'm happy where I am. I enjoy meaningful work. Helen said, lips curling. Meaningful doesn't always pay the bills. Sienna chimed in. Maybe not her bills, but I'm sure Evan can cover whatever she needs. Evan slammed his napkin onto the table. Stop talking about her, like she's not here. You're being cruel. Helen raised her eyebrows. We're being realistic. Aria touched his arm. It's fine, she murmured. Really. But it wasn't. Each comment felt like a grain of sand collecting into a suffocating avalanche. Across the table, Gerald lifted the expensive menu and said loudly, I suppose we should be grateful she's at least trying, though I've always believed a man deserves someone who helps lift his life, not someone who becomes a financial burden. The guests murmured in agreement. Something inside Aria cracked. She slowly pushed her chair back. Evan turned to her, brows knitting. Aria? Excuse me, she whispered. As she walked toward the restroom, she heard Sienna's voice behind her. I swear, she's one awkward dinner away from begging Evan for an allowance. A soft laughter followed. Aria squeezed the edge of the sink in the restroom until her knuckles whitened. Her reflection stared back at her, calm eyes hiding a storm. She wiped beneath them before any tears could fall. She couldn't let them see her break. Not tonight. Not ever. Her phone buzzed with a message from her guardian secretary. Miss Langford, the sovereign card was renewed today. Confirmation complete. She stared at the words, a cascade of emotions unraveling inside her. She had lived as Anna Lee for 2 years, by choice, not necessity. She had built a life where she wasn't someone's heiress or trophy or asset. She had been loved for who she was. But tonight was different. When she returned to the table, the conversation halted again. She took her seat, her face unreadable. Evan whispered, Hey, you okay? She looked at him, and her voice was soft. I'm fine. Gerald cleared his throat in annoyance at the interruption. Well, now that everyone's settled again, let's continue. Actually, Aria said, her tone gentle yet firm, I'd like to request a check. Silence fell over the table. Gerald scoffed. A check? Dear, this place is pricey. Very pricey. Helen folded her arms. Evan can handle it, don't worry. Aria reached calmly into her purse. The world seemed to pause. A metallic glint flashed as she placed the platinum sovereign card beside her empty plate. Conversations died instantly. Guests gasped. Gerald blinked twice as if unable to process what he was seeing. The waiter approached, eyes widening. Of course, Miss Langford, he said respectfully. We'll process it right away. At the name Langford, Helen's face drained of color. Sienna's jaw dropped. Evan stared at Aria, stunned, confused, searching her expression for answers. Aria lifted her chin slightly, her voice quiet but unmistakably steady. Since I'm such a burden, she said softly, I thought it was only fair that I cover tonight. Gerald's mouth hung open. Langford? He whispered. As in, Langford Industries? The entire table waited for her response. Aria simply folded her hands in her lap and looked him in the eye. Yes, she said, as in Langford Industries. The room fell into a stunned silence, the air thick enough to choke on. The ornate chandelier above the table seemed almost to flicker, as if reacting to the shock pulsing through the guests. Even the servers paused in place, holding trays in midair. Helen slowly leaned back in her chair, her voice trembling just slightly. You're joking. This is some kind of prank, isn't it? Aria didn't blink. No, it isn't. Sienna's fork clattered loudly onto her plate. No way. No, absolutely not. There is no universe where you're a Langford. The Langfords are... They're... Real? Aria asked gently. We are. But you work in a bookstore, Sienna sputtered, her face twisting in disbelief. You wear thrifted dresses. You take the bus. Yes, Aria replied softly. Because I choose to. Gerald swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he spoke. Langford Industries, they own half of the East Coast shipping routes, and his eyes darted toward the card, then back at her. This doesn't make any sense. Dad, Evan whispered, barely audible. But his voice wasn't angry. It was fragile, confused, shocked. Aria turned her gaze to him, and the whole world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. His eyes flickered with questions, hurt, and something like betrayal peeking through the confusion. She felt her heart twist. I wanted you to know me without all the noise, she said gently. Without expectations, without fear, without judgment. Evan's throat bobbed. Aria, why didn't you tell me? Sienna scoffed before Aria could answer. Isn't it obvious? She was testing how far she could get. Sienna. Evan's voice turned sharp. No, Sienna snapped. I'm sorry, but someone has to say it. She hides her identity, lies about her name, shows up here pretending to be some humble book girl, and we're supposed to believe she's just innocent. Please. Helen folded her arms, regaining a bit of her icy composure. It all feels very calculated, she said. Almost manipulative. Evan looked between his mother and Aria. Stop, please. His voice trembled. Just let her talk. Aria inhaled slowly, steadying herself as dozens of eyes stayed glued to her. I didn't leave my family to manipulate anyone, she said softly. I left because I spent my whole life being seen as a tool, an asset, a name on a corporation. People only valued me for what I represented to them, not who I was. Silence followed. I wanted to start over, she continued, to discover who I was without the Langford shadow. I wanted to earn my relationships, my friendships, my happiness. And when I met Evan, I finally felt seen. Her eyes softened as she looked at him. But before he could respond, Gerald leaned forward, his tone suddenly harsh. And do you expect us to believe that you, an heiress, just happened to fall in love with my son out of pure coincidence? Gerald, Helen warned under her breath. No, he raised his voice. I want answers. Did you plan this? Are you running from something? Are you playing some long game? Aria stayed calm, too calm. The kind of calm that made Helen's confidence falter. I didn't plan to meet Evan, she said quietly. I didn't plan anything except peace. And what about your intentions? Gerald demanded. My only intention, she replied, was to love someone who loved me back, without conditions. Sienna shook her head. This is insane. So what? You've been lying to all of us? To Evan? I never lied, Aria said, her voice firming just slightly. I simply kept my past private until I knew who I could trust. Oh, how convenient, Sienna hissed. Evan suddenly stood from his chair, forcing the room into stunned silence again. Enough, he snapped. Enough, Sienna. Enough, Dad. Enough. He turned to Aria, lowering his voice. I'm not angry at you. I'm just overwhelmed. I don't want to react with the wrong words. He squeezed her hand. Just answer me one thing. Everything between us, was it real? All the strength she'd held on to wavered just a little. Yes, she whispered. Every moment. His eyes glossed, emotion swirling behind them. Okay, he said softly. Then that's all that matters to me. Helen exhaled sharply. Well, that's just wonderful. So we're supposed to ignore the fact that she's been hiding her entire identity from us. Gerald added, a relationship needs transparency, trust. Aria let out a breath, her voice calm but guarded. Trust goes both ways. Helen bristled. What is that supposed to mean? It means, Aria replied, her tone still gentle, that I've been judged, insulted, and humiliated by this family since the first day I walked in the door. And you did that because you believed I was beneath you. Sienna rolled her eyes. Oh, please. No, Aria cut her off quietly but firmly. I sat quietly. I stayed gracious. I let you humiliate me. But not because I was powerless. Because being right was never more important than loving Evan. The room stilled. Gerald opened his mouth, but Aria continued, her voice growing stronger. You assumed I had nothing. No value, no status, no background. You dismissed me because I didn't show up in designer clothes or throwing around names or flaunting wealth. Because you hid it, Sienna muttered. Aria ignored the interruption. You taught me something important. You taught me how easily people reveal themselves when they think they're speaking to someone with nothing to offer. Helen's stiff expression faltered. And tonight, Aria said, you showed me exactly who you are. Gerald's jaw clenched. So why reveal it now? Why tonight? Aria looked directly at him. Because tonight, you tried to degrade the one person I love most. And I won't sit quietly while you accuse me of intentions I've never had. The weight of her words settled in, spreading tension like a slow-moving wave. Evan finally sat back down, voice tight with emotion. We can figure this out, but not if everyone keeps attacking her. The waiter returned at that moment with a small leather folder. He bent respectfully. Everything has been handled, Miss Langford. Thank you. Helen's face twisted as though the words personally offended her. Aria nodded. Thank you. Sienna leaned forward suddenly, her eyes narrowing into sharp slits. You know what I think, she said. I think you kept this secret because you wanted to test us. Because you wanted this dramatic moment to prove some point. Aria shook her head. I never wanted this moment. I prayed it would never come. Evan rubbed his forehead, emotional exhaustion creeping into his expression. Can we please stop? I can't do this with everyone attacking her. Helen lifted her chin. This is not an attack. This is a mother concerned for her son. Aria let her hands fall into her lap. A mother concerned would get to know the person her son loves, not interrogate her. Gerald rose again, chest expanding, as if bracing for another outburst. But before he could speak, Aria added quietly, I've never taken a cent from Evan. I never asked him for anything. I never needed to. And now we know why, Sienna muttered. Aria met her eyes, her own steady. And yet, you were threatened by me when you thought I had nothing. Sienna's mouth snapped shut. Evan stared at Aria, admiration flickering slowly into his expression. You deserve better than this, he whispered. Aria wanted to speak, but her emotions tangled too tightly in her chest. She swallowed hard, holding back the tears pressing behind her eyes. She hadn't wanted an argument or a spectacle. She had wanted a simple night honoring a family milestone. She had wanted acceptance. Instead, she'd been forced into unveiling the life she had tried so desperately to leave behind. And the night was far from over. Leah stood in the center of the Valencia family's dining room, feeling every pair of eyes digging into her skin as if she had trespassed into a world designed to reject her. The crystal chandelier above her fractured the light into cruel, glittering shards that made everything look sharper, harsher, including the expressions aimed her way. Marcus's hand brushed hers gently under the table, a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone, even if the room made her feel otherwise. The dinner had barely begun, but tension already pulsed like a warning beneath every polite word exchanged. Richard, Marcus's father, watched her the way a banker watches for forged bills, tilted head, narrowed eyes, assessing every move she made. His latest question still lingered in the air like a test she hadn't realized she'd been enrolled to take. So, Leah, he'd said, swirling wine in his glass, as if preparing to read the truth in its surface. How does a librarian manage to keep up with the lifestyle my son has grown accustomed to? The table had gone quiet, and all sounds seemed to shrink, except for the slow, rhythmic clink of his spoon as he waited. Leah had forced a small, neutral smile. I live simply, she replied. I've never believed that happiness comes from matching someone else's lifestyle. Richard raised an eyebrow, amused in that dangerous, condescending way only men convinced of their superiority could muster. How philosophical. His voice dripped skepticism. But philosophy doesn't pay bills. He took a sip of wine, and his wife, Eleanor, leaned forward with the cold smile of a woman who had long perfected the art of appearing gracious while drawing blood. We're just concerned, dear. We want to make sure Marcus is supported. He has big ambitions. And a demanding field, Richard added. Architecture isn't kind to dreamers. Marcus stiffened beside Leah. Dad. It's all right, Leah murmured softly before he could escalate things. She didn't want a scene. Not tonight, not here. I understand your concerns. Eleanor's smile sharpened. I hope so. But now, as the servers placed down plates of roast, as the family resumed their careful dance of small talk, Leah could feel something else rising in her. Not anger exactly, but exhaustion. Deep, bone-tired exhaustion from years of hiding, shrinking, bending herself into gentle shapes so others wouldn't feel threatened by a truth she'd never weaponized. She looked across the table at Chloe, the sister, with her meticulously styled hair, perfect manicure, designer dress, and eyes so full of disdain that Leah wondered if the hatred had ever been about wealth at all. Perhaps it was simply about difference, about the fact that Leah existed outside their polished bubble. Chloe stabbed a piece of meat with a little too much enthusiasm. So, Leah, she said brightly, are you still searching for your family roots? I remember you mentioned you grew up, what was it? Under a guardian? The jab was deliberate, disguised as curiosity. Eleanor and Richard perked up, listening intently. Marcus tensed again. Leah kept her voice steady. I did. My parents passed when I was young. Chloe nodded sympathetically, overly so. Must have been tough, too, you know. Not come from anything. She flicked a meaningful glance toward Marcus. I suppose that's why you appreciate opportunities more. The word opportunities landed like an accusation. Leah's fork lowered onto her plate, hands tightening in her lap. Her pulse thudded in her temples, matching the beat of humiliation that had been simmering for too long. Marcus' jaw clenched. Chloe, knock it off. What? I'm just talking, Chloe said innocently, batting her eyelashes. No, Marcus snapped, voice cracking with frustration. You're being cruel, and you know it. Richard cleared his throat sharply. Marcus, control your tone. Why? Marcus demanded. So you can keep insulting the woman I love? Love, Richard repeated dryly, as if the word were flimsy. Emotions fade, son. Financial strain does not. Leah felt something inside her shift, a slow, deliberate click. For years she had run from her identity. For years she had pretended that she was ordinary and that she didn't come from a world so wealthy it suffocated her. She had taken on a simpler life because she wanted sincerity, not the shadows wealth cast. And yet here she was, mocked, belittled, reduced to nothing by people who had no idea what nothing looked like. She inhaled slowly, trying to center herself. Not yet. Not here. Not out of anger. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Dessert arrived, lavish caramel tarts, arranged like tiny golden crowns. Yet the sweetness did nothing to soften the growing bitterness in the room. Then Richard lifted his glass. "A toast," he announced loudly, rising. Eleanor smiled approvingly. Chloe adjusted her dress, clearly anticipating something dramatic and probably humiliating. Marcus groaned under his breath. "Dad, not now." But Richard stood firm. "To our family," he declared. "To resilience, hard work, and—" His eyes slid to Leah, a glimmer of poison behind them. "The hope that we may avoid those who aim to elevate themselves through association." Leah froze. The words pierced like a blade, not because they were original, they weren't, but because they were spoken publicly, intentionally, and with the weight of authority designed to crush her spirit. The table fell into stunned silence. Marcus shoved his chair back. "Dad, what the hell—" Richard held up a hand. "I'm simply saying what everyone here is thinking." "No," Leah said quietly, rising to her feet. The room went still. Her voice trembled. Not with fear, but with a calm so sharp it sliced through the tension like glass. "Not everyone is thinking that." Richard smirked, mistaking her steadiness for fragility. "My dear, humility is admirable, but—" "You've confused humility with weakness," Leah said, eyes leveling with his. "They're not the same." A ripple passed through the table. Chloe scoffed. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Richard chuckled. "Then enlighten us." Leah reached into her small purse, fingers brushing the object she had hoped she would never have to pull out in this lifetime. The metal was cool, familiar, a symbol of everything she had tried to leave behind. She lifted it slightly, enough for only Marcus to see. His eyes widened. "Leah, are you sure?" he whispered. She nodded. "I'm done hiding." Turning back to the table, she straightened her posture, her voice steady and unshaken. "You all think I'm with Marcus for his money," she said. "But what you don't know is that I walked away from a world far bigger than anything in this room." "What is that supposed to mean?" Eleanor asked sharply. Leah's heart thudded. The next seconds would shift everything. Her life, Marcus's standing with his family, their future. But she had finally reached the line she would no longer allow them to cross. Her hand tightened around the card. And then, slowly, deliberately, she placed it onto the polished dinner table, its metal surface catching the chandelier's light. A black metal card, opaque, heavy, impossible. Everyone gasped. Chloe's fork clattered. Richard stopped breathing. Eleanor leaned forward, eyes widening. "Is that—" "Yes," Leah said softly. "It is." And the room broke into stunned silence so absolute she could hear her own heartbeat echoing like a drum. No one moved. No one spoke. The air itself seemed to have frozen in place as every member of the Valencia family stared at the black metal card lying on the table, sleek, heavy, unmistakable. Richard's face drained of color so thoroughly he looked carved from marble. Eleanor's jeweled fingers trembled as she clasped them together, as if silently praying that what she was seeing was some kind of trick. But Leah stood calm and still, her posture poised like someone reclaiming a piece of herself she had let gather dust for far too long. Chloe finally broke the silence with a choked whisper. That's a Titan Axiom Card. Only individuals with verified assets exceeding 200 million qualify, Eleanor finished shakily. Richard's gaze snapped to Leah, eyes narrowing in suspicion. Where did you get that? He demanded, though the question wavered with fear rather than authority. Leah met his stare without flinching. It was issued to me, personally. Richard scoffed, though it sounded weak. Impossible. You're a librarian. I chose to be a librarian, Leah corrected, because I wanted a life defined by peace, not power, by authenticity, not inheritance. Eleanor frowned deeply. An inheritance? From whom? Leah drew a slow breath. The weight of truth pressed against her chest, but she refused to falter. My parents were the founders of Calvin Dynamics. The name struck the table like a detonator. Richard's jaw dropped. Eleanor gasped so loudly she covered her mouth. Chloe looked as though she'd forgotten how to blink. Marcus, who had been standing beside her, simply stared, stunned, yes, but not disbelieving. His hand found hers beneath the table, steady and warm. You never told me, he whispered. I know, Leah said gently, her voice softening as she turned to him. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust what my world might do to us. I needed someone to love me as a person, not as a ticket to wealth. Her eyes glistened. And you did. Marcus, you did. Marcus exhaled, shakily squeezing her hand. I love you, with or without all of this. The sincerity in his voice weakened her knees, but she held firm. She needed to finish this. She returned her full attention to the family, who now watched her the way villagers must have once watched a dragon descend from the sky, fearful, confused, painfully aware that they had thrown stones at something far more powerful than they'd ever imagined. Richard swallowed hard. Why didn't you say something earlier? Because I didn't owe you my pedigree, Leah said. You judged me without knowing me. You mocked me for living simply, when simplicity was the one thing I was desperate to have. She looked straight at Chloe. And you insisted on calling me a gold digger when I have spent years hiding the fact that I come from the kind of wealth most people only witness from a distance. Chloe's cheeks reddened violently. I didn't know, she stammered. That's the point, Leah replied. You didn't care to know. A sharp silence fell over the room again. At last, Richard cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice held none of its earlier arrogance. Leah, I apologize, truly. If I had known... No, Leah cut him off softly. You don't get to apologize because I am wealthy. Apologize because you were cruel. Richard's eyes flickered with something unfamiliar on his face, shame. He lowered his gaze. You're right. Eleanor bowed her head as well, her voice thin. I judged you unfairly. Chloe, for once stripped of her veneer, whispered, I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. I was jealous. Marcus likes you more than he's ever liked anyone. And you were so calm and perfect. She blinked back tears. I thought you were trying to steal what I never had. Leah's expression softened. Not fully forgiving, not yet, but understanding. Then you should have spoken to me, not torn me down. Chloe nodded silently. Marcus slipped an arm around Leah's waist, his voice steady and resolute. This ends now. I won't allow another day of disrespect toward her. Richard raised both hands in surrender. You won't hear another word from me. Nor me, Eleanor agreed, still pale. The server approached timidly with the check, clearly sensing the tension but unaware of the storm that had passed. She set the leather folder down gently in front of Richard. But before he could reach for it, Leah did. She lifted the check, slid the black metal card inside, and handed it back to the server with a calm, almost serene smile. "Please put the entire bill on this." The server nodded, then glanced down, eyes widening as she recognized the card. "Of course, ma'am. Right away." She took it with both hands, the way one handles something precious. As she disappeared, the room sank into an uneasy quiet. But it was a different quiet than before, no longer filled with judgment, but with realization. Tension softened, postures eased. Even the chandelier seemed to glow a little warmer. Marcus exhaled. "Leah, are you okay?" She nodded. "I am, for the first time in a long while." He brushed a hand along her cheek, his gaze tender and steady. "I don't care about your wealth, you know that." She smiled, leaning into his touch. "I know. That's why you're the first person I've wanted to share it with." Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. If you both ever want help with connections for your future projects, I'd be happy to." Marcus held up a hand. "Dad, not now." Richard closed his mouth immediately. The server returned, handing the card back with a deep bow. "Thank you, ma'am. Everything is settled." Leah smiled graciously. "Thank you." As they walked toward the front entryway, Marcus leaned close. "You know," he whispered with a grin, "you handled that better than I ever could have." Leah smirked faintly. "I've had practice." Richard, Eleanor, and Chloe followed a few steps behind, strangely quiet. When they reached the door, Eleanor approached first. "Leah," she said softly, "thank you for your grace tonight. It won't be forgotten." "Neither will your honesty," Leah replied gently. Eleanor nodded. Chloe approached next, eyes glassy. "I hope we can start over." Leah glanced at Marcus, then back to Chloe. "We can try." Finally, Richard stepped forward. He opened his mouth, paused, then placed a hand over his chest in a stiff but earnest gesture. "I respect you." Leah gave him a small smile. "And I hope one day you'll respect yourself enough not to measure others by their bank accounts." He nodded, accepting the rebuke quietly. Outside, the night air was cool, refreshing, and gentle as it wrapped around Leah's shoulders. Marcus interlaced his fingers with hers as they walked toward the car, the streetlights painting warm halos around them. When they reached the vehicle, Marcus turned her to face him, his expression soft but intense. "Leah, I'm proud of you. I love you. And if you want, we'll set boundaries with them moving forward." She nodded, tears finally breaking free and slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, but tonight felt like a beginning." He kissed her forehead, lingering. "A new one." As they drove away, the restaurant lights faded behind them, replaced by the quiet promise of their future. Leah gazed out the window, feeling both lighter and stronger than she had in years. For the first time, she wasn't running from her past. She was walking toward her future on her own terms, with the man who loved her beyond titles, beyond wealth, beyond expectation. And as the city lights blurred softly around her, Leah knew her worth had never needed proving. But tonight, she finally claimed it.